Good. So we had some fun there learning about each other's culture, what we grew up on, what we knew, and maybe there were some things you were surprised that the younger generations did not know. I think you would be just like me when I was at a conference and I couldn't believe that some teenagers did not know all four Beatles. And here's the thing. The younger generation can't believe that you don't know some of the stuff that was up there. So what we're going to be talking about tonight is out of Psalm 78, 1 through 8, called Not on My Watch. Now, before I get into the main part of this message, I want to give you some stats and insights into Generation Z. Generation Z were born in the mid-90s. Earliest is 94, latest is 97. And before 2014, if you have a child or a grandchild born after 2014, the name that is thought they're going to be is Generation Alpha. Okay, we're starting all the way back over in the alphabet. But Gen Z, born earliest 94, latest 97, and before 2014. They are not the same as the millennials. I am a millennial. The millennials are already grown adults and have a kid like me. Gen Z is the largest generation in the United States, making up 26 to 32% of the United States population. That's Gen Z. Millennials are at 22. Gen Z is Gen-Z. Gen Z has always been connected, meaning that the technology that we have today has always existed for them. They watch on average a day 2 to 4 hours of YouTube, but many of their days make up more than 2 to 4 hours of YouTube. 78% believe in God, but you have to realize, I hope I didn't get that mic wet. Just because they say believe in God doesn't mean they believe in Jesus. 4 out of 10 attend religious services. 42%, and I would say this is highly growing, think that social media directly impacts them personally. You have to think about all the influences that use media and how connected they are to them. Again, 42% is growing at a rapid rate. Also, they are the most connected generation, yet they all the time say that they are lonely. You have 8 seconds or less to engage them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If you don't engage them within 8 seconds, you lose them. 8 seconds is the max. 76, and I would say more than 76, have a Netflix subscription. Okay? If you have Netflix, you know a lot of the things that are on Netflix that you may not be guarding against. 76 of Gen Z have a Netflix subscription. The youngest is born in 2014. Here's the most shocking for some of us. When Gen Z is asked where they would rather watch or listen to streaming media, 3% said TV. The highest is on mobile devices and computers. 51% and 40 something percent. 3% said they want to watch something on TV. None of us adults grew up watching stuff on mobile devices. We grew up watching on TV and antennas that you had to move. And your parents having to tell you, hold it right there. Or putting foil on them too. The most heartbreaking of all this is these sobering statistics. Blair, you can throw this first one up for me. Currently, 66% of students are dropping out of the church after high school. These were those who were active in their church. This is your first blank. Those who were active in their church during their high school years, but they were not active in the church during their college years. Gen Z is already in college. In 10 years, this percentage only changed 4% from 70 to 66. Some people might want to say, you know what, that's a good job. We did really good in 10 years. No, that's pitiful. We've only dropped it from 70 to 66. Here's another statistic. 89%, next one, of Gen Z students who are leaving the church after high school regularly attended worship services. But here's the glimmer of hope. 71% that left didn't plan on taking a break in the first place. This means there's hope within this generation. But we have to be willing to say, not on my watch. The phrase, not on my watch, carries the idea of staying awake to guard and making sure things are okay while others are asleep. Adults, we have to be willing to say, not on my watch, while everybody else is willing to just sleep and sit by. We have to be active for this generation. This message tonight might be encouragement for some of you to keep doing what you're doing. For others, it might be a challenge for you to start doing something. Because we can all do something for the next generation, and we all have something to offer. To understand what or how to impact and reach the next generation, we have to look back and learn lessons from the past. Tonight we'll be looking at Israel's past and the lessons we can learn from it. Why is it good to look back and remember? Well, because hindsight is 20/20. When we look back, we can see things that are now obvious to us that weren't originally on the onset. Unfortunately, in the church, we don't do a good job of this. Sometimes we have a set-in-forget-it mentality, or we never review the past, or if we think, if it's not broke, why do we need to fix it anyways? Or sometimes we just think about the good old days, but we don't look back and see what we might need to change or tweak. Church, we have to be honest about our failures and what we need to do so those things don't happen again. Something that greatly impacted me were the 3 summers that I worked at a summer camp. After each week, we would get all the staff together and process the week on Saturday. The kids left at 12. We ate about 12:30, 1:30, and immediately went into a processing session. We talked about wins. We talked about losses. We talked about if there was anything we needed to change, tweak, add, or remove. And the hard part was that everyone was not always in agreement. But we had to remember in camp who the camp was for. It was for the camper, not the staff. That was something I had to understand at times, that the campers took precedence over any decisions we made. Every decision was made in regards to the camp, to their safety and if they enjoyed camp or not. So, we need to process, church. So we're going to be reading about Asaph. Well, the writer of Psalm 78 is Asaph, one of David's chief musicians and the writer of 12 of the Psalms. He writes Psalm 78, a maskil, which is a song of instruction. Asaph is teaching spiritual lessons from observing Israel's past unfaithfulness and disobedience through song. Why a song? Well, you already sang a 2-tone song and you remembered a number. We use songs because people love music. They remember songs. And if you want to remember something, set it to music. I learned my presidents by singing a song. I learned every country in Africa due to a song when I was growing up. And so let's read Psalm 78, 1 through 8. I'm going to read this. Psalm 78, 1 through 8. My people, hear my instruction. Listen to the words from my mouth. I will declare wise sayings. I will speak mysteries from the past, things we have heard and known, and that our fathers have passed down to us. We will not hide them from their children, but we will tell a future generation the praiseworthy acts of the Lord, his might, and the wondrous works he has performed. He established a testimony in Jacob and set up a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers to teach to their children, so that a future generation of children yet to be born might know. They were to raise and tell their children so they might put their confidence in God and not forget God's works, but keep his commands. Then they would not be like their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation whose heart was not loyal and whose spirit was not faithful to God. I believe that the main thing that Asaph is trying to say is, which I've already mentioned, not on my watch. There should be a desire for each one of us as well to confidently say, not on my watch. So for us to be able to confidently say, not on my watch, we must hear and listen. Asaph is talking to those he calls my people, the people he serves, those he has direct contact with where he leads music, the people he fellowships with, and those he is around daily. These aren't just random people he wrote to, this song to. And after calling their attention, we see he tells them to hear and listen, which means to process and understand what is being said. Why? Well, often as humans and people, we do a good job of doing everything but hearing and listening. There's a reason that James tells us in chapter 1, verse 19, to be quick to listen and slow to speak. If we don't hear and listen, we will miss out on what God is trying to tell us and what He is calling us to. And maybe even things that we need to change or fix in our lives. Oftentimes, we get too concerned with our preferences and our agendas and getting a word in that we completely talk over God. I want you to think about it. In your conversations with God, who does the most talking? You or God? Do you ever take time just to be still, to listen, and wait for what God has to say? I know from my time with God, I do most of the talking. Give Him all my complaints. Give Him everything I want Him to do. But how often do we just be still and listen? Verses 2 through 3, to confidently say, not on my watch, we also must be resolved. Asaph begins to tell the people what he will do. He shares his resolutions and what he will not compromise on. He says, I will declare and speak. Meaning I won't be silent, I will take action. He is making his own resolutions, and since it's a new year, maybe each one of us need to make similar resolutions like him. Asaph then makes it clear, he goes from the singular I to the plural we and our, and he's basically saying, you know what? No one is exempt from teaching and speaking. I'm telling you what my resolutions are, but he's also saying this is what every one of us needs to do. And the thing is, the problem as a church as a whole, not just here at Bethsaida, is that we often are too good at doing bad things at times, like creating silos. We will create a youth ministry, we'll create a children's ministry, we'll create a music ministry, a senior adult ministry, adult life groups, women's ministry, men's ministry, etc., which are all good things. But what happens is we often don't mix the generations or introduce them to each other or encourage them to interact. Oftentimes we keep them separate, say you can stay over here. And we don't really bring them together unless it's special occasions. But here's the thing that we learn from this passage. If God has impacted and changed your life, you are to speak about it. You are to pass it on. Everyone in the family of God has something they can talk about and share. And throughout Israel's history, God never made it an option to teach the next generation. And here's the thing, and we have to realize this, church. In Israel's sin, they made it an option if they wanted to teach the next generation or not. But God had never made it an option for them. And unfortunately, they paid the price for it. So what are we to do then? Well, to confidently say, not on my watch, we must make a conscious decision to reach the next generation. We have to. A conscious decision, a conscious effort. Asaph shares the target of his resolution, basically saying who I'm resolved to teach, which is the next generation. Their own children. He basically says, I'm going to talk all about the Lord has done. What is he specifically going to tell the next generation, though? Well, if you were to read further in Psalm 78, you would read about how Asaph pulls out selected events from Exodus all the way to the book of Samuel. Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel. Things about what God had done in Egypt to bring the people out through miracles and wonders of God, through the crossing of the Red Sea, through leading the people by cloud and fire through the wilderness, providing water out of a rock, how God continued to provide food from them, manna from heaven, even though they kept sinning, and how God was patient and compassionate to them, even though they were completely undeserving of it. Asaph talks about the good and the bad. He talks about how they were obedient, how they even messed up and sinned and were unfaithful to God. And Asaph wants the next generation to learn from the past so they won't be unbelieving and rebellious like the previous generations. What's the phrase about history? If you forget about the past, you're doomed to repeat it. Asaph is being transparent and genuine. And here's a hint. I talked to our young people today. What the next generation wants from you is don't be fake, be real, Because there are too many people they're watching and following that filter everything in their life. They want honesty. They want transparency. And so here's Asaph. He's not hiding mistakes like we often do in our lives. Asaph is taking this seriously because he remembers that a whole generation before had completely forgotten about God's covenant. Do you know anything about that? If you were to go read Judges 2, 10 through 13, it would say this. Go to the next slide for me, please. That a whole generation was also gathered to their ancestors. After them, another generation rose up who did not know the Lord or the works he had done for Israel. The Israelites did what was evil in the Lord's sight. They worshipped the Baals and abandoned the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of Egypt. They followed other gods from the surrounding peoples and bowed down to them. They angered the Lord, for they abandoned him and worshipped Baal and the Ashtoreths. You know what generation they followed? These people followed Joshua's generation of taking over the promised land. The generation right after that didn't know who God was. Asaph remembers this. He brings this up. Continue reading Psalm 78. He talks about this stuff. So in verses 5 through 8, to confidently say, not on my watch, we must look beyond. Asaph isn't just focused on the next generation. He looks beyond the next generation. He knows that what he does now can impact a generation that hasn't even been born yet. And church, we must start looking beyond now, not later. We must start looking to the future and what we want the future to look like, because what you impart now to the next generation is what will be passed on to those who are not yet born, those who are born after you and I are gone from this earth. What you pass on to this generation will be passed on to the next generation. Do you realize that we can connect a generation far from us, far removed from us, to God and his promises? You can connect a generation far removed from you to God. So let me ask you, what are you passing on? Does the next generation know that your confidence is in God? Do they know that you're saved? Do they know that you love God? Are you practicing being obedient and faithful to God? If you're not, then the next generation will be just like you, not loyal or faithful to God. Look at the verses following, if you were to read following in Psalm 78, you will see these phrases written that Asaph records. He says, they did not keep God's covenant. He's talking about the previous generations, that they did not keep God's covenant. They refused to be obedient. They forgot what God had done. They deliberately sinned against God. They did not believe in God's word, and they did not rely on God, and they provoked God. The previous generations, that was what they passed on. Do you want to be remembered like that? This should be a wake-up call for some of us. What God requires from all of us is to impact and teach the next generation. Each generation has a responsibility to tell the next one about the goodness of God and to warn them of the mess that we make of our lives when we turn away from God's goodness. And that is what Asaph was resolved to do. So here's the thing. Do you want to know why young people are leaving the church and not being committed? They are leaving because what is being modeled for them by those closest to them, family and friends. Because get this, children are great imitators. See, it's not school, it's not college, it's not what they're following in the media that's causing them to leave the church, it's us. And here's the thing, if we don't teach our children to follow Christ and model it, then the world will be glad to teach them not to. So if you're not teaching them, the world's going to come in and stack right on top of that and say, okay, yeah, you don't need to go to church. You don't need to be involved in the church. You don't need God. We have many people who go to church and play church, but are not obedient and faithful to God when they are away from the church. They wear masks at church. They play the good boy. But when they go home, their life looks nothing like what they claim to believe. So here's the thing. Model what you want to see. Because what you model is what's perpetuated. How do I have proof of that? Think about the traditions in your family. Think about the traditions as far as what you do over the holidays. Why do you do what you do? because your grandparents, your parents? Have you ever had a moment and stopped and said, oh my goodness, I'm my dad or my mom because of something you did? Because of what was passed on to you, what you saw and what was modeled to you. This is why we need to pray passionately for the next generation and to be burdened for them. Don't just idly sit by waiting for Jesus to come back and complaining and sulking about how the world is. What are we to do in the meantime? Well, the church is the bride of Christ, and if the church is the bride of Christ, they need to look like the bride, ready for the groom to appear, and unfortunately, too many churches have stopped trying. And so, here's the challenge. You might be willing to sit by and not impact the generation, but not on my watch. One way you can be faithfully serving God right now is by reaching the next generation. And here's the thing. If you think it's bad today, just imagine what it'll be like in the future for the next generation if we don't do something now. So we all have a story to tell. Every family has stories. Every church has its own stories of what God has done. Every Christ follower has a story of life change, of a testimony. All of us have access to the greatest story of all time, what God has done through Christ. So this is where you come in. This is your importance as an adult. It's said that the next generation needs at least 5 adults, a team of adults that they can identify in their life for a specific purpose. 5 adults can change things for the next generation. How? You have to show up consistently. You have to show up when it's not comfortable, even when it's uncomfortable for them and you. And you have to show up when you are needed most. The next generation, like everyone, has changing circumstances throughout their life, and they need a caring adult who will lean in and journey with them. Why? Here's the thing. At every transition in life, a move, a change of grade, a change of relationship, change in family, a change in job, they are at high risk of losing faith at every transition. And all they need is 5 adults who they can point to that are spiritual leaders in their life. You can give them hope. Adults, you're the hope for the next generation. And as we already saw before, hope is within reach if we're willing to say, not on my watch. The next generation needs you now more than ever. They need you more than they want to admit, because they won't tell you that they are so close and they easily lose their identity. They so easily lose their sense of belonging and purpose. So, challenge you, see the next generation like Jesus sees them, that they matter. Did you know that if you believe in them and what they can do, and how you see them can change how everyone else sees them. So if you start having a positive attitude towards them, you start seeing the things in them that make them great, that they're passionate about. If you see those things, you can change how everyone else sees them. But not only how everyone else sees them, you can change how they even see themselves. Because they don't need to constantly be hearing how the next generation is awful and how they did this and that. Because you're modeling exactly what they're going to do for the next generation after them. So, there's resolutions to reach the next generation. And here's the thing. Maybe you're from an older generation. You have found it hard to relate or talk to younger generations. But here's a great passage for you to pray and receive encouragement from. It's Psalm 71, 17 through 18. Psalm 71, 17 through 18. That's the blank there for the older generations. And I want to read to you what Psalm 71 says. Now go. God, you have taught me from my youth, and I still proclaim your wondrous works. Even while I am old and gray, God, do not abandon me while I proclaim your power to another generation, your strength to all who are to come. I don't remember who wrote Psalm 71, but they're saying, God, even when I'm old and gray, help me to remember what you did in my youth and to continue to do it for the next generation. But maybe another resolution is Psalms 145, verse 4. Psalms 145, verse 4. that says one generation will declare your works to the next and will proclaim your mighty acts. And this might be something that you may need to pray or something you need to write somewhere of just saying, you know what, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to make sure wherever I go, the next generation knows that I'm going to talk about God and everything that He's done. Or Psalms 22, verse 30. Phillips boys, if you can go ahead and start passing those things out for me. Psalms 22, verse 30 says, their descendants will serve Him. The next generation will be told about the Lord. Maybe that needs to be a resolution for you to say, I'm going to teach the generation. The next generation will be told about the Lord. On my watch, they will be told. So we need to be like Asaph. We have to be resolved to impact the next generation. This is how I close, and this is going to be the application. Phillips boys are passing out a separate handout for you. And what I'm going to do is introduce you to an initiative that we're starting today that will be up on the website that you can follow and you can look at, but you also have this as well. It's called Pray for Next Gen. You can go ahead and throw that slide up for me. Pray for Next Gen. I'm going to read to you what's on here, and then you can look at it as well when you get it. We're going to have a tab on our website in the coming weeks that talks about this and also other prayers that you can be praying for the next generation. Number one, specific prayers specifically for next gen at Bethsaida. It says that I challenge you to pray that God would use you to impact the next generation. And here's the thing, that you would willingly allow Him to lead you and show you how. You may not be here, you may not be from Bethsaida, but you may be involved in another church. And if you're involved in a church, you may need to pray to God and say, God, I am willing to allow you to show me what I need to do, how I can serve to impact the next generation. Be willing that God may pull you out of your comfort zone and show you something that you can do, and you have the gifts and talents to do it. So here's some specific things. You can pray about how God would maybe use you weekly here at Bethsaida, or if you're at another church, maybe Wednesday nights or Sunday. Maybe pray about how God would use you on a recurring basis at Bethsaida with the next gen. Maybe it's serving in nursery. Maybe it's serving in children's church rotation, or simply volunteering when you can for weekly events. Maybe you need to pray about how God could use you to serve at Bethsaida or another church for next-gen special events such as VBS, Trunk or Treat, camp. I love that Miss Diane went with us this past year. She loved it. I don't know if she's going to be able to go back this year, but she loved it and got to experience teenagers worshiping. Candace Libran, who went with us this past December to Move Conference. Got to hear some great speakers. And here's the thing. Leaders, if you're willing to go as a leader for me, I will do everything to make sure that you don't have to pay anything. Because I understand that you might be taking time off. But for you to come alongside and serve and to get to experience something, get to hear from great speakers. Our students got to hear from an ex-Muslim at Move Conference. One of the greatest testimonies I've ever heard. Enough to make me go buy his book. But got to hear one of the most renowned evangelist speakers out of South Carolina who just spoke in Africa to hundreds of thousands of people. So maybe God be leading you in that direction. Pray for those working with Next Gen every week, week in and week out at Bethsaida or even at your church, and that God would strengthen and encourage them. I can tell you, but I can tell you, everybody else here who serves or serves with the next generation, it is hard. It is very hard, but here's the thing. It is so worth it. I remember when I was serving at the camp those 3 summers. I remember my first summer I was praying, God, help me impact these kids. Help me do what I need to do. And you know what? God the next week turned around and showed me how much they blessed me by what He allowed me to be involved in. It wasn't me blessing them, but they blessed me in return. So pray for these people that are serving week in and week out. Pray for people that are even serving in the school system. If God is not leading you to serve, or if you're unable to, pray that God would raise up more adults who would be burdened for the next generation at Bethsaida or another church. Finally, and it'll be flipped over on the back page, one thing you can simply do is pray passionate, heartfelt prayers for the next generation daily or weekly. And here's some things you can pray over, because these are huge things. Pray over next gen's home life. You can pray over their family dynamic. Just do research on Gen Z's family dynamic, and it's nothing like previous generations. Pray for their relationships with their family. And you can pray specific things too. I'm not going to go into that just so we don't air a lot of things out there, but they need prayer over stuff in their families. Pray over them as they are in school, whether it's elementary, middle, or high school, or even college. They start going to college, taking their college classes at 11th grade or even before. Pray over them as they're with their peers, whether in athletics, clubs, extracurriculars, band, whatever it might be. Pray over those things. If they're your grandchildren, if they're your children, if they're your friends or your children or your grandchildren, or you just know somebody, pray over them. Pray for those who are already in the workforce. They're having to be around adults. And it can be a little intimidating. And it can be intimidating just working with those who they know. Pray for them. Here's a big thing. Pray for them to be wise about what they do online and on their mobile devices. YouTube, social media, streaming services, their tablets, cell phone, what they listen to in music. I could go on. Pray for those things. Pray that they would flee from temptation and not give in to it. Because it's everywhere. Adults, I know we've had temptation and we grew up with a lot of temptation. Nowhere near what they have now. They have access to anything 24/7 because of what they have in their hands. And that the problem is a lot of times they don't have anything on there protecting them from it. Pray that they would be committed to church weekly, that they would attend their services, whatever the church they go to, and even after they graduate. Pray for the next generation to be burdened for their peers and that they would reach them with the gospel and invite them to church. Because you can invite a youth pastor all you want, and I am doing everything I can. But here's the thing. What kid is going to listen to an adult and invite them to church? Maybe if you create a relationship with them, maybe you create a relationship with their parents, but they're more willing to listen to their peers. And the thing is, you need to be praying for the next generation to be reaching their peers, to invite them to church, to have a burden for their peers, to share the gospel with them, to invite their peers to church. Pray that they would find their gifts and talents and then use them for God's honor and glory. But here's the thing that's really important that Brad really has a heart for. Maybe pray about, here at Bethsaida, spiritually adopting one of the next generation. And here's the thing. If you already have some here, I'm asking you to think about going outside your family, getting to know somebody else. You could do it anonymously. I'm just going to throw ideas out here where you could come to me, or I could go to one of their teachers here and ask, hey, do you know anything about their family? Know what's going on in their life? Anything you can be specifically praying for? You could write them a note. I don't know what it is. Check in on them. It's up to you. But if you want to say, I want to find one of next gen and be praying over them, being their spiritual, just adopting them spiritually, that they have somebody that's praying for them daily. That's up to you. I have so many things here that you can be praying for, something that God could be moving in your heart, so many ways that you can be involved in the next generation, because, as we already talked about, the next generation needs you. They won't admit it. They're going to try to push you away all they can, especially when they get in those teenage years. And then in college, they'll come back for money. But they need you. They need you to show up when it's more than comfortable. They need you to be consistent. They need you to lean in. So here's the application. I think I'm going to have Megan just play a little bit of music over it. But what we're going to do is, all I'm going to challenge you to do is right now, there may be someone specifically that God is telling you need to be praying for this person right now. And there may be something right now on here that you're like, yeah, I definitely need to be praying about this because I know somebody that's having some issues with this. And so if you want to come up here, you're more than welcome to. You want to stay where you are. But let's have heartfelt prayer for the next generation. And you have some in here right now that can witness that. Let's pray for the next generation.